My name is Dara Channon, and we are here today with Yoka Verdon. Wait,
We'll start again.
how do I say your last name again?
Verdoner.
Verdoner. Okay. My name is Dara Channon, and we are here today in Oakland, California with Yoka Verdoner. And today is July 20th, 2024. And that's it.
Okay, and then let me just grab that slate real quick. Can you hold it up to the camera real fast, just so we see it? Awesome, got it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yoka, why don't you start by telling us your full name at birth and if you could spell it as well, please.
My name at birth was Josephine with an F, as in Frank. And my last name was Verdoner. Verdoner. I was named after my father's favorite sister, Josephine. But I was known my entire life in Holland by Joke, which in Holland was spelled Joke, which was a very common, was and is a very common name there. Of course, later when we immigrated to the United States, I immediately had to change it to Yoka. And I know I'm running a little bit ahead of everything, but I also lived in Israel for a time, and there my Hebrew name at least was Yael.
And tell me about where you lived before the war and your family that you lived with.
My father and mother both came from Amsterdam. In fact, they didn't live far away from each other. But when they married, my grandfather, my mother's father, bought them a very nice house in a town about half an hour outside of Amsterdam called Hilversum. I can spell it. Hilversum. And that's where I was born, and also my younger sister, Francisca, who was 2 years and a few months younger than I, and my brother Otto, who was born 2 years after Francisca. So we lived on a very nice street in a very nice area, wooded, kind of unlike a lot of the rest of Holland. Very pretty, very nice. And so the five of us lived there. We were well-to-do because I remember we had a live-in maid and a live-in nanny. My father, well, I should say my grandfather had started a bicycle shop in Amsterdam, and my father and he and a partner founded a bicycle factory, I think in the late 20s, I'm not quite sure actually. So my father was the director of this well-known bicycle factory in Holland called the Magneet, which is the Dutch word for magnet. And it was a very well-known brand, I would say at that time as well-known in Holland as Ford is in the United States. So that was our life there.
And when were you born?
November 16, 1934.
And tell me about the language that you spoke in your home.
We spoke Dutch. I was Dutch. I had no idea I was Jewish, in fact. We were just Dutch. I mean, my parents were Jewish and nobody was hiding it, but it didn't really, in my life, as a 6-year-old, it didn't come up.
How about celebrations or holidays in your home? What was that like?
The biggest holiday was the Dutch holiday, Sinterklaas, which is celebrated on December 5th, when Sinterklaas, who's nothing like the American Santa Claus, comes on his white horse from Spain on a boat to Holland to give presents to children who've been good. And he has a helper who has a sack over his shoulder, and bad children go in the sack. I think this is the biggest holiday in Holland for everybody. You write poems for people in the name of Sinterklaas, pointing out their foibles, etc. It's a very, very much a fun holiday. And Sinterklaas on his white horse came to my kindergarten. We have film footage. My father loved to make films, I think 8mm, and he filmed when Sinterklaas came to my kindergarten. I went to a private little kindergarten at somebody's home who did that. So, yeah.
And tell me more about your parents. Their names, where they were born.
Okay. My father's name was Gerrit. There's no real English equivalent. He had 2 older sisters and 1 younger sister. I think both his parents' families had been in Holland for a very long time. I think one ancestor fought in the Napoleonic Wars, or at least so I've heard. He was spoiled, I think, being the only boy, and he had a lot of girlfriends, apparently, before he and my mother married. My mother's father was born in a very poor family in the north of Holland, in a town called Leeuwarden in Friesland, one of the northern provinces. His father, so that would be my great-grandfather, whom I never knew, of course, was like a civil servant, because I remember my grandfather telling me that they would do the city's tax records under the kitchen lamp on the kitchen table in their home. He was the 8th child, and he wasn't all that welcome because they lived in a very small house. Everybody slept in what's called a bedstay. Maybe it sounds a little like the English word bedstead, but they were really beds in the wall. Probably also because, this was customary in Holland at that time, probably also because you could close the doors to those bedsteden, and that would keep some of the heat in, because it was very cold in Dutch winters and no central heat. So he grew up in that family. He was not a good student. He didn't care about school, so his father took him out of school when he was, I think, 12. And he had various jobs as apprentice or delivery boy, whatever. And then he went to work in a textile store. Or maybe when he was about 14 or 15, he and his 1-year older brother took a boat to Amsterdam, and where they already had an older brother and an older sister living. And he did all kinds of work there. But he also, worked his way up, and he ended up making silent films. He became a film producer. I know this sounds like a big leap. I don't know exactly what went on in between there. He became a film producer, and eventually he became an in the silent films, and I think then some talkies. He was a well-known figure in Amsterdam. He was an impresario. Um, he earned a lot of money during the Depression because I think he had bought textiles or something. So he had a lot of property during the Depression. And so coming from an extremely poor background, he became a very wealthy man. Did very well. They lived in a beautiful house. I remember that very well. And they had 3 children. My mother had 2 brothers. One became a painter. The other died in Bergen-Belsen, unfortunately. The painter brother had emigrated to America before the war, so he survived. Those grandparents also survived because he was a well-known Dutch person. He went to Theresienstadt, and some people survived Theresienstadt, and they survived. My Verdoner parents did not survive. They went to Auschwitz on the same transport as my mother. I can tell you more about that later. So my mother grew up in this well-to-do family. She was not allowed to go to university because she was a girl. She was sent to the household school. She was not interested in housekeeping at all. It was like a home economics school, you know. She was not in the least interested. She went off to Italy to study Italian. And then after that, she got a job as a secretary in Rome. And my grandfather wanted her to come back, and that if she wouldn't, he would stop sending her an allowance as he had been. And she said, "That's okay. I'm earning my own living here. I'm doing just fine." So she was a very kind of independent person like that. And eventually she did come back. She met my father, although I'm surprised they didn't know each other before because they, lived in practically the same neighborhood, which is called Amsterdam-Zuid, southern part of Amsterdam, where there was a large Jewish community. She was 24 and he was 34 when they married and moved to Hilversum. So all 4 of my grandparents were well off. My mother's mother was German, and it was an arranged marriage, with a dowry and everything.
And so when you were a young girl before the war, living at home with your parents, tell me about a typical day at home or whatever you remember about what mealtime was like.
Well, I don't remember that much. I remember struggles about food. We didn't want to eat, and in those days children were made to eat and clean their plate and blah blah blah. So I can tell you about when my father would come home from work, and we would climb on his knees. There were usually fights as to who would sit on his lap because he had only 2 knees and 3 of us. And he was great at making up stories. There was a character, Snorre Janus. It means nothing in English. There was this character who was a kind of country policeman who did stupid things. And Snorre is a mustache, so this country, I don't know whether you'd call him a policeman, but anyhow, that was his name. So I don't remember. I don't remember very much. I remember going to school. I remember hearing the story. Oh, in the school, the teacher. I was only 5 3/4 when I went to 1st grade. And I remember the teacher reading us Pinocchio, which terrified me because Pinocchio behaved badly. And I think his mother died out of grief. And I would look out of the window hoping that our nanny or whoever was coming to pick me up was approaching the school and I could leave. So that's about what I remember. I do remember what happened. Not that I remember I remember the day the war started because my family tried to leave the country. My father had gone to a port, IJmuiden, and my mother and the three of us were taken by my grandfather's chauffeur, so this is my mother's father, to meet him there. We were shot at on the way there, and we went into some stranger's house at the side of the road for shelter. And we never did meet up with my father, so we went back to Amsterdam. Oh, by then we were living in Amsterdam because the Germans had commandeered our home, in fact all the houses on that street, for their officers to live in. So all I remember is that we went back to Amsterdam to my grandparents' Verdoner, where we were living, in a street called the Breugelstraat, named after the painter Bruegel. So that's Breugelstraat number 4. We were all living there. We went back and we didn't have to eat dinner. We just got some warm milk and went to bed. That house in the Breugelstraat, it's like a 4-story house or something, is now part of a hotel in Amsterdam. My grandparents lived on the Reinier Vinkeleskade, spelled Reynier, and then capital Vinkelles. Reinier Vinkeleskade, Kade, number 73. My grandparents' Verdoner lived Breugelstraat number 4. When we went to Amsterdam, because the Germans had commandeered, first in Hilversum, so in first grade I was in a private school, but after first grade, that must have been beginning of 42, not sure, actually, but at the point where Jewish children were no longer allowed to go to regular schools and Jewish schools were set up, I went to a Jewish school kind of on the other side of Hilversum. I hardly remember that. Apparently I took the bus on my own and didn't mind one bit, but I hardly remember. But my father wasn't happy about that, and he arranged at a private home a little class for 8 second-grade Jewish children with a Jewish teacher, whose daughter was also in the 2nd grade. And, we got school benches and so on. So I was in that little, what do you call it? Of course it was private, but it was kind of clandestine too, perhaps. I was there for a while until we went to Amsterdam when our house was commandeered. And in Amsterdam, I went to a Jewish school around the corner from my grandparents' Verdoner. It was called the Jan van Eyck School. Actually, both Bruegel and Jan van Eyck are Dutch painters. So Jan van Eyck, Eyck is E-Y-C-K. So I completed the 2nd grade there. And then in July of 42, the transports were in full swing. By this time, my father had lost his business. the factory, which he and his father had set up. The partner was not Jewish and ran the factory under supervision of a German, whatever, Verwalter or something. My father had a job at that time with the Jewish Council in Amsterdam. The transports were to Westerbork, and the razzias, the raids, were in full swing at that time. And my father no longer felt it was safe to keep us at home. And he wanted us to go into hiding. And I believe that this was arranged with the help of the Jewish resistance in Hilversum. I'll tell you later why I think that. The first place that was found for me was a former children's sanitarium in Zeist. That's Zeist. And the place was called Sunshine, Zonneschijn. It was run by two women. And apparently they took Jewish children, against payment, of course. And so I was sent there. Recently when I was wondering about that place, I thought I would Google it. And, someone had just written a book about it. It was really amazing. So then I looked up the author, whose name is Jim Terlingen. And I saw interviews with him, and I saw video interviews with him, and he looked like a really nice person. And I had started working on a book of my parents' letters to me during that time, and I'm still working on that. Also my letters to them. Anyhow, I contacted Jim, and we talked on video, and he's going to help me publish that book. So I'm very happy about that. So he's also written other books. He's a historian and a journalist. Okay, so this is it. Apparently terrible things happened in that children's home, but I don't think they were happening when I was there. I never saw anything terrible. I remember feeling cold, so I was 7, close to 8 years old. I remember feeling cold. I apparently did have lessons. I didn't go to school. I had friends. I cannot say that I was desperately unhappy, and I kind of understood a little bit why I was there. But then my father heard probably, he had connections. Anyhow, he heard there was going to be a raid on the children's home. There had been some sort of betrayal. I heard afterwards that all the children walked into the woods. But my father got me out of there, but they didn't have another place to put me. So then the person who was looking for a place where I could be hidden couldn't find a place for me. And meanwhile, I was staying with our former nanny in The Hague. She was married by then. She was in fact pregnant. And I stayed there about 2 weeks around Christmas time. This was December. But I couldn't stay there because the neighbor, it was an apartment building, the neighbor was a member of the Dutch National Socialist Bond. He was a collaborator. So there was some kind of urgency about this. So then the person who was looking for a place for me asked his brother. His brother was Dick Reinders. Actually, his formal name is Dirk, D-I-R-K, but everyone called him Dick, D-I-C-K. And so Dick Reinders, R, and then the Dutch Y, which is IJ. So it's RIJNDERS. And his wife Ella Reinders, and her maiden name was Van, V-A-N, lowercase, and then capital KEMPEN. So Ella Reinders van Kempen, whether they might be willing to take in a Jewish child, and they agreed. So Dick was the mayor of a small village near, I guess you could say near Leiden, called Wouwbrugge. I'll spell that too. Okay, WOUBRUGGE, Wouwbrugge. And a canal went straight through the middle of Wouwbrugge, and the mayor had a big house on the side of the canal. They had no children. In fact, she had had a number of miscarriages. They'd been married 8 years. So I went there on January 3rd, 1943. So they were around 34 years old at that time. So I called them uncle and aunt, which is common anyhow in Holland for friends of the family, even if they're not, biologically related. So Oom Dick and Tante Ella. I was very lucky that I landed there because they were very good to me, very good for me, and it was just a good placement. And my last name was changed. It was no longer Verdoner, but it was changed to Verdoren. So they just changed 2 letters. It became Verdoren, which sounds like a regular Dutch name. And of course hid my real name. I knew that I was hidden, and I knew I couldn't, Joke is a very common Dutch name, so I became Joke Verdoren. I was blonde and I had pigtails, and eventually I went to one of the schools in the village. This was the Protestant school, the school with the Bible, which is a concept in Holland. Schools with the Bible were just the Protestant schools in Holland. So from the Jewish school to the school with the Bible, more or less. I learned a lot about Jesus. We had stories from the Old and the New Testament, an hour every day in the morning. These were wonderful stories, which I had never heard before. And later in life, when I became a literature student, they came in really useful too. My aunt and uncle were observant Christians and prayed before meals. It was very sincere, and the prayers were kind of personal. Of course, I ended up believing in Jesus too, and in God. And let's see, what happened next? Oh yeah, I had a best friend, and we stayed best friend till she was in her 80s and died, unfortunately. Okay, so I was going to school, I had friends, I played at recess. I missed my parents and my brother and sister. And I was probably a little bit depressed underneath it all, perhaps. But I'm not sure, well, whatever.
I'd like to go back just a little bit to
Sure.
where you went into the children's home. Tell me what you took with you. when you...
Right, yeah. As I was going to the children's home and sitting in the back of the car, my grandfather's car, I was holding a cyclamen plant. I don't know what it's called in English, maybe the same. And also, I already loved reading, and I had a bookcase at home, and it was just two shelves connected. It had been a present at some occasion, I'm sure, and that came with me, and it was fixed above my bed. I don't know where it went afterwards.
What do you remember being told about going into hiding?
I don't remember what I was told, but I did understand. I mean, I knew that we were occupied by the Germans. We had a bad name for them in Dutch.
What was it?
Moffe, de Moffe. It's meaningless in English. I don't know. What do you want to ask about that?
What do you remember feeling like when you learned that you were Jewish and you had to move schools? What did that feel like?
As a child, you don't question things. And, I didn't feel anything. And I mean, I was clearly must have been a bright child, but no, yeah. So now I'm going to the Jewish school. I will say that I remember when we had to start wearing a yellow star. That was when we lived in Amsterdam. And I felt kind of grown up that I had to wear a yellow star. Those stars, I think we had to pay for them with textile points, ration textile points. And I think my mother had to take the star off my blazer one day to put it on an evening dress that she was going out in. So it certainly was a very weird time. And I felt very grown up. My sister was too young. She couldn't wear a yellow star. So, I mean, that's kind of... And in Amsterdam, I was still quite free to walk around on the street. But I don't know if I was wearing a star at the time I was walking around on the street. Because I remember going to a bookstore and with a friend, my grandfather had given me 2.5 guilders, which was a silver piece at that time. And I was walking along this very well-known street, the Beethovenstraat, and somehow I had lost, must have been 7 at the time. I had lost the guilder, the Rijksdaalder it was called. And we happened to run into my grandfather, Verdoner, and I told him the dreadful story, and he took out his purse and gave me another.
What do you remember were any rules that had been put into place also, in addition to wearing the star?
You mean in Wouwbrugge with my aunt Dick and Tante Ella, or what?
Any rules that were put into place when the war started?
By the Germans.
Yeah.
Nothing that affected me. I wasn't out after 8 p.m. anyway, I mean.
So there was a curfew?
Yes, there was a curfew.
Okay. And I just wanted to go back to when you said that your father tried to leave the country. How did your mom feel about trying to get away or hiding you?
My father really understood what was happening. And the thing is that both of them had helped German Jewish refugees who had been coming to Holland in the 30s. So they knew what was happening in Germany, but like many Dutch, the Dutch didn't think this was going to happen to them. And even when the Germans invaded, my mother thought it'll be over in a few months. So yeah, she was all for going and trying to get out of the. She agreed with trying to get out of the country. On that day, we went to IJmuiden and didn't get away. Didn't meet up with my father, but it was my father who insisted on our going into hiding. My mother didn't understand how serious it all was, I think, and she had always been very independent. And I don't think she really had a good grasp. They disagreed about what should be done because my father was also trying to get out of the country. I mean, we have his letters from after the war. There was supposed to be a special transport, I think, to Portugal, and you had to be on a special list. And my mother said, I won't go, not even if you paid me. So she didn't have a clue, and yeah, she paid dearly for it. Because she was arrested while she was trying to get a false identity card for my father, which, without consulting him, and the person she was trying to buy it from, and this was in a cafe, turned out to be a collaborator, so she was arrested when she left the cafe. She was taken to a police station in Amsterdam, where my father happened to know some of the police people. He was able to visit her. This was also around Christmas, 1942. And she went after about a week in the police station, or maybe a little longer. We have the exact date, but that's roughly. She was sent to Westerbork. Because my father had this job with the Jewish Council, he went to Westerbork regularly. His job was to provide food for the Jewish prisoners in Holland. So he would go into Westerbork, and he spoke with my mother. Also, in connection with his job, he was able to get her out in September of 1943, must have been. But then there was a very big raid which rounded up the last Jews in Amsterdam on September 29th, 1943. My father happened to be in Westerbork that day, and he heard about the raid. Both his parents and my mother's parents were also rounded up that day because they had been able to stay in Amsterdam until then and not gone into hiding. My father decided that one of them, my mother and he, had to stay alive to take care of the children. And so he decided to leave the camp. He hitchhiked with a truck from the camp. He tore off his Jewish star. He could already not go back into their house, the Verdoner house, where where they had been staying with my grandparents, Verdoner. And he went into hiding immediately. And stayed in hiding. Then later in the war, he also tried, with the help of the underground, where he was in Northern Europe, and the camp was not far from there. He tried to get my mother out, and my mother refused to leave Westerbork because she thought there would be immediate reprisal against her parents and his parents and her brother, who were all in Westerbork. So the way they tried to get her out is some people from the resistance came in with a ambulance, and I think and a nurse's uniform for her, something along those lines, and she refused to go. And they made more than one attempt, and it put those fellows in the resistance in danger too, you know. So I know that Oom Dick was kind of angry about that. When he told me, he spoke to me about it after the war. And of course, my mother paid for it with her life. It was a moral decision, but it was misplaced. But no one knew. I mean, people made decisions according to their best instincts, and you can't second guess them.
What do you think contributed to her staying there?
What I said just now. She was afraid of reprisals against her parents-in-law, and her brother. My father didn't think that would be the case necessarily. He said many others got out, was what he said. But, I don't know. I have no information. Of course, I wish she had gone out. I wish she had escaped and took that opportunity. At the then she got jaundice, because jaundice started spreading in the camp. And she ended up in the camp hospital, which was an excellent hospital with many Jewish doctors and nurses, people she knew. But on February 9th, 1944, the hospital was emptied, and all the patients were taken to the train on stretchers, supposedly for labor in Germany. Anyhow, they were taken straight to Auschwitz, and as my father said, hopefully they died right away. Yeah.
Do you remember experiencing any anti-Semitism yourself during the wartime?
No, I didn't experience anti-Semitism until I came to the United States.
Well, I want to hear more about that. But going back to, you were now staying at Dick and Ella's home.
Yes.
And tell me more about how you fit in and were able to go to school and do things with other children.
Well, maybe I'll tell you. Did I tell you yet that I came there in January, and that in November they had a baby? So that's maybe more interesting even. So oh yeah, one of my letters I write, Tante Ella has been a little bit sick and has had to stay in bed, so I bet she was on bed rest, for her pregnancy. But a little bit before the baby was born, I went to her parents, so the grandparents. I also called them Oma and Opa, I think, who lived in near Rotterdam, where he had been mayor of that particular suburb. And in fact, Oom Dick had worked under him when he was mayor, and that's how he and Ella met. So I went there. So they also risked their life and safety by taking me in, and they still had adult children living at home. It was a very large house in Hillegersberg. I also had a friend there who lived across the street, Ali. And they had a big garden, and it was very, very nice. And during the time I was there, Roos was born. Roos, it's Rose in English, but Roos in Dutch. And she was born November 24th. My birthday was November 16. I turned 9. She was born on the 24th. And I got this sweet little poem from my aunt. I hope you come soon to see who she resembles, something like that, So Roos and I were very close. sadly, she died in her late 50s. Yeah, but I'm now very close to her daughter, my quote-unquote niece, and her children. So my day in Wouwbrugge now, I cannot tell you too much about that. You know, we had breakfast, I went to school, we had lunch. I mean, I did my homework, you know, I played. So I can't tell you too much about that. We had a Christmas tree. You know,
And how about any visits from your mom?
well, while before she was arrested, yes, she visited me in the children's home a few times. She would bicycle from Hilversum, where she was apparently, I don't know what she was doing there, hiding with someone else. There was Corrie van Abt. I came across that name, Tante Corrie. And I also have an address. And I think she stayed with her. I don't know exactly what, you know, there's no one I can ask. But she would bicycle through the woods from Hilversum to Zeist. And I have a lot of letters from her from that time. Yeah.
How far of a bicycle ride was that?
Well, I asked, it's good, interesting that you asked that. I asked a cousin, a second or third cousin who still lives in Amsterdam, and he said he thought it was an hour and a half from Hill. He thought it was 25 kilometers. I don't know if that's an hour and a half.
And what were those visits like with your mom that you can remember?
I think they were pretty quite nice. I mean, of course, she always brought things for me, and you know, presents. And she came for my 8th birthday, which was celebrated. They had friends nearby, a German couple whom they had helped. When that couple left Germany, they were a mixed marriage. So that's what. Now he was Jewish and she was not, although in point of fact she had converted because he was Orthodox, and they had 2 daughters my age. So their names were Hans and Leni Meyer, and their daughters were Ruth and Eva. Eventually they also emigrated to the United States, but they went back, I think. Eva stayed here. Ruth is still living in Amsterdam, as far as I know. Eva died, and of course the parents have died too. But I was there for 2 weeks, you know, while they were trying to find a place for me, before I went to the nanny. There was 2 weeks there, 2 weeks in The Hague with our nanny, Grada van der Beek. Her husband was Hans van der Beek. This is the nanny. Yeah, where were we?
What was the story that people were told about why you were staying with these families?
Well, there were no stories in The Hague or Huis te Heiden is where the Meyer family lived. But in Wouwbrugge, the story was that my mother was in a sanatorium in Switzerland. And that's why I was with Oom Dick and Tante Ella. No one asked anything. My girlfriend's father, you know, the next door people, they had a big, what do you call it, they built sailboats. I forget what you call it in English. In Dutch it's called een jachtwerf. So her father said, he said we knew, but you know, nobody said anything. I think my story was so ridiculous, but that was my story. But you know, you don't just, as an 8 and 9-year-old, you don't talk about that. You talk about, did you do your homework, and, you know.
And what was the house like with Dick and Ella that you lived in? What was that home like?
It was a very large, beautiful house because it was the mayor's home. It was not their home. In fact, they didn't have a lot of money, although he was the mayor. I don't think you got paid a lot for being mayor of a small village. It was beautiful. It was on the water, a very large living room, dining room, kitchen. There were 2 rabbits named Churchill and Roosevelt. They had a sense of humor. And I had a little garden. I mean, in the big garden, I had my own little vegetable garden.
What was your room like?
I had a little room in the attic. And there were high dormer windows. I would stand on a chair in the evenings sometimes and look out at the beautiful countryside, the meadows and the cows, and in the spring, the flowering trees.
And who are some of the people that helped find these homes and keep you hidden?
Well, I think the main one I know is Uncle Dick's brother, whose wartime name was Henk. I only knew him as Uncle Henk, Henk. But his real name is Cornelis. Well, it might be Bernard Jacques Cornelis. I'm not sure. Reinders. He was a banker. His father was a Protestant minister in Hilversum. So I knew his parents. They came to visit Oom Dick's parents, but I think I knew Tante Ella's parents much better, also because I stayed with them. So Oom Henk, and he must have been a marvelous man. I wish he had so, for instance, I still have a little note from him. Well, I think I gave the original back to the family, but saying he hoped I was behaving myself. Well, I mean, that was just one part of the letter. And that he had sent my bicycle. So this man, with all this worry and responsibility, also took the trouble to send my bicycle to me. I mean, that's just amazing, And he said my bicycle was on the way. He was just a very nice man.
And what happened to him?
I thought didn't I mention that just now in here? No? Okay, so he had a lot of families that he was responsible for living in the north and northeast of Holland, I believe. And he, had to make sure that they had, what do you call it in English? Ration cards and false identity papers, etc. Okay, so there was a woman, a Dutch woman collaborator. I mean, this is one of those crazy stories. Who I think had a love affair with someone who I think was also in the resistance, but she was also feeding information to the Germans. And so she says she went to the Germans and she said she could point out her former lover with whom she had apparently broken up in an unhappy way. And Oom Henk it wasn't Oom Henk. He was on the train, but I think as he was standing on a platform, I think she pointed to him. I know all this after the war, okay, from Oom Dick. She pointed, so this collaborator pointed to Oom Henk and said, that's him. It wasn't him. I don't know what happened there. So they arrested him on the train and, he had false papers. I mean, they caught him. They weren't looking for him at that time. They caught him. These were Dutch Nazis, so they took him off the train and they shot him. And it's just terrible, one of those things. And so his body was found floating in a canal the next day by some Dutch person there. So that's what happened to Oom Henk. He is now, he has finally been recognized. He was not really part of the organized Dutch resistance, I think. So.
And were other people hidden in the home with?
Yeah. Well, there was one of the administrators, helpers, Oom helpers at the town hall, was also living with us. Meneer Sandberg, I don't know his first name. And he came from an aristocratic Dutch family. You still have aristocrats there in another part of the country. And he apparently went home to visit his parents. He was worried about them. And, he was not Jewish, but he was in hiding because the Germans were rounding up all the young Dutchmen to work in German factories. So, I don't know, he was shot while he was visiting them. And then they also took in another Jew, Huub. And so Oom Huub, everyone is Oom and Tante, right? Aunt and uncle. And Oom Huub's wife used to visit him. But I think they were angry at her too because she endangered them, I think, by trying to get food from the farmers. But Oom Huub survived too. At the end of the war, so Oom Dirk, who was the mayor of this village, he cooperated as much as he could without betraying anyone or sending any people to work in Germany. He avoided all that. But then near the end of the war, he was asked to provide names of Dutchmen who could go to Germany to work. But this was like maybe 2 weeks before the end of the war. Then they went into hiding, the three of them. Oom Dirk, Tante Ella, and the baby. And I was taken in by the head of the school with the Bible, who had been informed all along of who I was, in case I needed to be spirited away. They had a toddler, so they took a big risk too. And his name was Mooijaert, M-O-O, and then the Dutch Y, A-A-R-T. I don't know his first name because we called him Meester Mooijaert. That's what in Holland, in provincial schools. He was the meester, the master, So he was the principal, and he was my teacher in 5th grade because there was a class that was being prepared for secondary schools, and not all children in the village went on to secondary school. So that was 2 weeks before the end of the war.
I know you had mentioned you had a few visits from your mom and you even got letters before she was arrested. What about hearing from your dad?
Oh, yes. My father wrote lots of letters all throughout the war, including lots of rhymed stories and jokes. He told jokes in his letter. I sent him, what do you call it? Not puzzles, but what do you call it when someone has to get riddles? I sent him riddles too. Yeah. So shall I show you a picture of my father? Or this is not now. Yeah. My father, although he had a temper, he was also a really fun person.
Tell me about, there was a period of time of hunger or something or
Yeah.
in the winter. Tell me more about that.
There was a starvation winter in Holland, particularly in the west, in Amsterdam and The Hague. People would go out trying to get food on bicycles which didn't have proper tires anymore. So sometimes they would go to the farm country on their wooden tires, and then if they got anything, they would hope to get back home before running into German soldiers who would confiscate it. But my aunt and uncle also sometimes had people from the cities who were starving staying with them, so because we were surrounded by farms. I was never hungry. We got food from the farms. I mean, the farmers gave us food, and we did try tulip bulbs. I remember eating tulip bulbs. They weren't very good. They're kind of tasteless. And I remember that my aunt tried to cook sugar beets on top of the little stove. They boiled for hours. I don't know whether sugar came out of them or not.
And what about your siblings? Where were they?
My sister Francisca was with a childless couple, who were in the resistance. First she was in Zandvoort, which is on the Channel, on the Atlantic Sea, ocean. And the Germans made everyone leave there, because they wanted to build fortifications there. So they moved to Amsterdam. My sister they went to an apartment or a home right across from the Jewish Schouwburg, the Jewish theater where all the Amsterdam Jews were put before they were taken to Westerbork. So she could hear the trucks arriving at night, people getting out of the trucks and going to the theater. Also, they had no idea about how to take care of a child. I mean, she was actually beaten if she didn't behave well, in quotation marks. And, she was much younger. She was 5 years old. She didn't have a clue what was going on. They wanted her to call them Mama and Papa. She didn't understand this at all and made mistakes, and they would punish her. So she had a very difficult time, and it left its marks. Yeah. My brother was only 3 when he left home. He was in various places, but he ended up with a family in Diepenveen. Diepenveen is near Arnhem. So when the Battle of Arnhem took place, I think, they saw the planes and all that. So he was there till he was 6 years old, so from 3 to 6 roughly. Well, his birthday is in February. They were liberated before we were in the West. We were liberated by the Canadians, by the way, in Holland. This was a blended family. Both his foster aunt and uncle had lost their spouse, and she had become his housekeeper, and he was a banker, I think, and she came from some kind of prominent family too. Anyhow, they ended up getting married and had a blended family. So he has about 4 or 5, or he had about 4 or 5 much older siblings. I mean, like he was 6, and I think the youngest of their children was 14 or something. And they loved him. They were wonderful to him. But I think the war, the separation, And then, of course, first of all, my mother was killed in the war. My father, unfortunately, died after we immigrated. He died in October 1947. So that was really very, very bad for us, bad luck for us, that we immigrated. I never liked leaving Holland. I didn't want to leave, when we did leave. I was 12 years old. I liked my new school. I liked where we lived. I liked it there. I didn't like it here. So, and he doesn't remember anything from his childhood. I mean, just chronic trauma, you could say, chronic PTSD.
Say more about that.
What more?
PTSD. Otto had chronic PTSD.
Yeah. Right. Depression and just, being out of it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the most frightening moment that you can remember during your time in hiding.
It was not from the Germans. It was from the English who were strafing the canal we were on. The English, or the Allies, towards the end of the war, were shooting at anything that moved. And we lived right next to a canal. And there was traffic on the canals too. Boats. They would shoot at the boats near our home. The first time that happened, I screamed. And after that, I was very afraid, as I lay in my bed in the attic, so much closer to those planes in my thoughts. And I thought I was hearing maybe the motors from planes and the motors from ships. So, yeah, that was frightening. I was not afraid of interestingly enough, I was not afraid of the Germans. But I want to tell you, I had no clue about what was going on. I lived a very protected life. I knew why I was there, and that, the Jews that it was dangerous to be Jewish. But I had no clue how dangerous.
Did you ever have any close calls?
I didn't, no. The only, I never had a close call, but from a completely different period when we were still living in Amsterdam and my father was on the Jewish Council. Jews were not allowed to have Gentile employees, so my grandparents had a Jewish maid from Germany, I think, in fact. Another one. And I remember once she had come to see my father, because she was living with my mother's parents, I think, and she was a maid there, but she came to my father she had been called up for transport, and she was begging him to help. And she was crying very loudly. She was sobbing, and he was just telling her he couldn't help her. And I was standing in the hallway, and I heard all this. And then my father saw me, and he kind of slammed or kicked the door shut. But I kind of knew what was going on. But somehow but I kind of also didn't. I did and I didn't. It didn't really penetrate. I mean, I know Uncle Huub, the other Jew who was in hiding with us. I know he was a Jew and that he was hiding, but I don't know, I guess I had a very self-protective shell way of looking at things.
Tell me the first thing you remember about liberation or about learning that things were
coming to an end with the war?
Well, liberation was great. I was very happy that, the war is, and, we always talk, everyone always talked about after the war will be this, after the war, and after. So liberation was wonderful. I know we went to the village, to, downtown. It's probably 5 minutes walk away. And, there was celebration and happiness. And then a few days later, I saw someone approach. I was playing outside, and I saw someone approaching the house, and I immediately recognized who it was. It was my cousin Albert. All my cousins were older. My father married late. And he was 24. He had been hiding in Amsterdam. And I guess he knew where I was, and he came to look me up. I knew immediately who he was. Yeah.
How did you know?
How did I know? I recognized him. It was Albert, yeah.
No? And how did that feel?
Wonderful. Exciting, yeah. Meanwhile, my father was still in the north. Oh yeah, I have a postcard that Albert sent to my father, that he had looked me up and my sister. We were in the west, he and Otto were in the east, so they had been liberated before we were. So when my father was finally able to come to the west, there was still no civilian transportation on the roads. But my uncle also, we went on the packet boat. It was a regular packet boat, on the canal. Windhorst from Rotterdam to Amsterdam. And so my Uncle Dick took me there, and my father was waiting there, and Uncle Dick said, he had business in Amsterdam, in the city, and I spent time with my father. I was very happy to see him. He was happy to see me, of course. And my uncle had already told me that my mother had been arrested. Oh, my father had written during the war, Mama is ill, and, she has to stay in bed. But she was really invested. She was in a camp. And he knew when she had been put on transport, but he didn't know anything more. No one knew exactly after the war who had survived and who had not. And for quite a while, people still hoped. So I asked my father, do you think, the phrase people use is, I said, do you think Mama is coming back? And he said, no, I don't think so. So, and I said, you never think that something like that is going to happen to you. So it seemed just very strange and unreal to me, I think. I also think that I was probably, as I read these letters, and I think that probably I was not as close to my mother as to my father. I mean, yeah.
What do you remember feeling then when you asked your dad that question about your mom and he gave you that answer?
I wanted information. You see, the what do you feel question is a very American question. It's always being asked on American television,
So what question would you want to know?
Maybe what was it like?
What was it like?
It was really strange. It was I knew I wasn't going home with him then because we didn't have a home yet. Well, I mean, it was kind of wonderful. It was wonderful to see him. Yeah. And I was very curious to see my brother and sister.
What was that reunion like with them?
I don't remember, and neither do they. None of us remember. Yeah. I guess it just seemed normal. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly remember the reunion with my father, yeah.
What do you remember about hearing the fate of other family members?
It's very strange. It's like at that time, it's like they didn't come back. I mean, that's how it wasn't, you didn't say they've died. No one said they've died. They didn't come back. Ze zijn niet teruggekomen. They didn't come back. I think the whole extent of the tragedy didn't hit me till much, much later. And especially when I started working on the letters. My sister and I published my mother's letters from Westerbork. She had secretarial skills, so she worked in the office. And she was able to type letters, and they were smuggled out to my father, because officially you could only write like a 12-line letter or something on camp stationery. But she sent long-typed letters, which we found, and after 40 years, my sister and I had them translated. I edited the English version. My sister was going to have them copied in a copy shop, but the man in the copy shop started reading them, and he said, "Oh no, these should be published." And I know a publisher. So we never looked for a publisher, but yeah, we found a publisher. I mean, they found us. Then the publisher wanted photographs, and the book is called Signs of Life in English. The letters of Hilde Verdoner Sluizer from Transit Camp Westerbork. Can I show the book, or is this, am I being photographed only from here on up? Yeah, from here on up only. I can hold it in front of my face.
We can show them afterwards.
Afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That book was also translated into Dutch. It was finally published in Dutch in 2011. I'm very happy it got published there, because I really felt it should be published in Dutch. So and in Dutch it's called Levenstekens. And now I, about a year ago, found all the letters they wrote to me, and I thought these should be published. So I'm working on those now, and I think I was telling earlier how I met Jim Terlingen on the internet, because he had written a book about the children's home where I was, and he will help me get it published in Holland. He will edit it and put it together. And then I decided, first I thought only in Dutch, but then I decided it really needs to be in English too. So everything has to be translated, including what I've been writing. And I'm very fortunate that I have a good friend here too, and it's Jacob Boas, who wrote many books about the Holocaust, who's also a historian. He wrote the book about Westerbork, which is called Boulevard des Misères. That was the street where the trains came. People went on transport on. And Jacob, he will edit the English version. So I have two wonderful editors. But it's still quite a job, because it's English, Dutch, photos, letters, and little pieces I have to write in two languages. So I hope to get it done.
When did you first look at your mother's letters?
Probably early on, but we just didn't get it, you know? I didn't get it at all. None of us got it. Well, my father had already died. I mean, she writes in one letter that, you know, she has the top bed. You know, they had bunks in Westerbork. Of course, we had no letters from after Westerbork. And, I mean, she writes it's kind of like a ski vacation. She had a place to hang her washcloth. And, you know, at that time I thought, how can she be writing about such mundane things, you know? So we didn't look at them for 40 years. But my sister has 3 children, and she wanted them translated. She's quite right. She, you know, she started to work on it. We had them translated. I edited them, and because my Dutch is still the best, and also I have some editing experience from my professional life. So that's what happened.
When you say you weren't getting it about the letters, say more about what.
Well, I wasn't getting the whole Westerbork situation. I wasn't understanding it.
And what do you understand more now that you didn't then?
I understand it now.
And can you share more about that?
I'm not sure I want to.
That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And how has finding those letters changed, if it has, your life?
Well, the first set of letters, the English language version, I don't think it changed my life, but we were very happy to have done it. I remember when it arrived, it was like we finally had the baby, you know. It was like having a baby for me. Mm-hmm. We were very happy about it, that we did it, and even now, looking back at it, it's a good job. We did a respectable job. Mm-hmm. I mean, the publisher was a very weird publisher. I mean, they published books like How to Tie a Scarf, you know. I'm not sure they ever had done anything like this, but they did a good job. I mean, you know, we had our say too, of course. And then they went bankrupt. Sorry. And I mean, I'm sorry for them. I think it was called the Atlantic Press. By the way, my memory is also not that well. This is, of course, more recent. Acropolis. It was called Acropolis. And my brother-in-law had to pay $4,000 to get the book published at all, because but you know, he wanted it out of the house because, of course, my sister was totally preoccupied with it too. So, you know, he had to pay $4,000 so they would publish the book. So we were very happy when it was published. And we both got many, many reactions, yeah. I've tried to get it into libraries. You know, so much gets lost, even books.
I'd like to go back to when you immigrated to the U.S. with your dad, and just hear a little bit about what that process was like coming here.
My father just didn't want to stay in Holland because the Dutch government, well, his former partner had actually started a lawsuit against him, saying that he had traded with the Germans, done business with the Germans, and he was actually arrested and was in jail for 2 weeks. I don't know what you. I mean, so he had lost his parents. He had lost his wife. He had been in hiding for 2.5 years. He'd lost his business. And then the Dutch government saw fit to put him behind bars for 2 weeks. So at that point he couldn't wait to leave. And in fact, he didn't even want to wait for a Dutch boat. We went on a Swedish boat. We went on this Gripsholm, and from Sweden. And well, he visited. So two of his sisters were in New York City by then. His favorite sister, Josephine, and her husband and their 2 sons had escaped in 1942 by way of Belgium, France, and Spain. And this is also an incredible story. And sailed from either Spain or Portugal, I'm just not sure, to the British West Indies. They sailed on my birthday, November 16, 1942. I mean, their trip is an incredible, their trip down Europe to Spain is also an incredible story. Anyhow, they were in New York, where my uncle had done very well. They were living on Fifth Avenue near the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So my father visited them in early 46. And he flew. We were in Hilversum. We had a very good housekeeper who had been our maid before the war. She and her husband and her child moved in with us. There were no houses. So they were happy, and we were happy about she was very good. And while he was here, my father got visas for himself and the 3 of us to immigrate. They got them in Montreal.
And how did you travel?
How did we travel? By train on my birthday, my 12th birthday. My father had seen to it that we had a birthday cake with candles on the train. So we went by train to Sweden, Göteborg. And we stayed for a few days until the ship sailed. My sister and I were seasick the whole way. My brother and my father were not. We were met by a lot of relatives in New York. And not long afterwards, my father became ill. It turned out he had inoperable cancer. Or actually, he was operated, but he could not be saved. He died in October of 1947. So my Aunt Josephine, and he died knowing that his sister would do the best she could for us, because they were very close. But her husband was not that interested in having 3 more children. He wasn't all that interested in having children himself to begin with. But of course people had children in those days, so they had 2 sons. Anyhow, we kind of all lived together for a while. So these were my teen years, let's say. We were not happy. And I didn't like America. I know I would have had a much better youth in Holland. None of us, we did not have a happy youth. I tried to get away when I went to college, but there was no money. I went to Queens College of the city of New York. I was very fortunate that there was this excellent free college. And my brother and sister also graduated from there. So we were really fortunate in that. I was placed a year ahead because Dutch education was apparently much better than American education. So whereas I had been in my 7th school year in Holland, I was placed in the 8th grade here. And I went to high school, I guess when I was almost 13. And I graduated I was 12 when I went to high school. I graduated at 16. And I went to Queen's College. My sister had lost some time, so I was placed ahead, and she was like behind me and behind, but doing okay. Well, okay, and whereas I wasn't all that homesick during the war, when I was in America, I was very homesick for Holland. It's interesting, there was a big conference of hidden children in Amsterdam somewhere in the 1990s. And I remember that we broke up for small group discussions, and people talked a lot about how the war after the war was worse than the war for them. And I would say that was true for me as well.
Can you explain more about what you mean by that?
Well, I always did well in school. After I graduated from college, I got a fellowship to graduate school, and after that I became I taught freshman English, as a graduate student and so on. So I did well in school, but I never felt 100% at home.
And what was that like for you?
I didn't like it. And I tried, I thought, well, I can't go back to, after I graduated, I'd been teaching here, first in a girls' prep school in Wellesley, Massachusetts. The school was called Dana Hall. I remember I was being led around by the assistant principal, and she said, "This is our chapel." So I made sure to tell her I'm Jewish. And she was telling me how the wonderful families her Jewish students have. Yeah. Whereas in Holland I wasn't Jewish, I certainly identify as Jewish now.
I'm interested to hear more about that process. You talked about going to the schools where you learned about the Bible and the stories, and yet it seems like you have come around and now really
Oh yeah, I was religious
identified.
for a time. Oh no. I came home. I came home to Hilversum after the war, and tried to convert my sister, who was only 8, or maybe not even 8 at that point. I don't know. She's a little younger than I am, and I told her about Jesus, and I told her about God. But she tells me when I started telling her about the Holy Spirit, that was a bridge too far for her. She couldn't quite grasp that. I think that was the end of her conversion, maybe. But okay, so my father, of course, discovered that I believed in Jesus and in God. He was horrified because he was an atheist. His father still went to synagogue, and they had Shabbat dinners and all that. My father's father still practiced. My mother's, I don't even think her grandparents practiced any kind of Judaism, any kind of religion. Okay, so the Dutch were very assimilated until the Germans made them Jewish again. The Dutch Jews were very assimilated until the Germans made them Jewish again. My father was horrified, as I said, and took me on his lap and explained to me why God could not exist. And I thought, in Dutch you say, ik laat hem maar praten. I'll just let him talk. This is one fight I know I'm not going to win. So that's what happened. And then later on in the United States, I went to a Unitarian work camp. I liked that fine. I thought, well, if it has to be a religion, maybe Unitarian is okay. So I think I considered that. But as of today, I am, again, an atheist, like my dad.
And what does being Jewish mean to you?
It's cultural and tribal, and it's cultural. Jewish jokes, My father liked Jewish food. My mother didn't like to cook, but okay. I went to Israel, in fact, because, as I told you, I never felt 100% at home here. So, and I felt I couldn't go back to Holland, so I went to Israel on vacation just to kind of see what it was like. And incidentally, my parents went to Palestine on their honeymoon. They certainly identified as Jewish, just not religious. So primarily Dutch probably and Jewish. Just like there were Protestant Jews and Catholic Jews and, Dutch. Protestant Dutch and Catholic Dutch. Okay, so I went to Israel for a vacation and I really liked it. So I had a wonderful job at the time at the French Lycée in New York City. I had been there for 5.5 years. I think I thought, I might feel more at home. I did feel very good in the French Lycée, which was a European environment. But I thought maybe I would feel more at home in, another country. So I went to Israel. I got a year's leave of absence from the Lycée. They would have been happy to take me back. After I'd gone there for a summer, I went back to the Lycée, I went back to the States, and then I went to Israel. This was in 1967, and just when I was about to go is when the 5-day war broke out. But I went after. It was a little after the war, I think. So this was a very optimistic, happy period in Israel. So I certainly identify as Jewish. Where were we? What was your question?
You answered my question. Thank you. You did. But I wanted to ask one more question about, we were talking about life in the U.S. and you were telling me about college and going to Israel. What was it like when you first came here about learning English?
I learned very fast.
And how was that initial,
I was 12 years old. I think I had lessons, but I learned so fast. I remember that when I was in high school, so this was less than a year after I came here. Well, it was about a year after I came here, I guess. Because, let's say, I was placed in the 8th grade, and then in September I went to the 9th grade, so that must have been September 47. Yeah, I guess. So anyhow, we had a course in civics at that time, so we could learn about the American government. Everyone did. And we had a nice teacher. And the students who had done very well didn't have to take the final. The students who hadn't done so well would have to take the final. And the students who were doubtful cases, and I was one of those, he handed out Reader's Digests, and he said we should choose an article and talk about it. And based on that, he would decide whether we needed to take the final or not. And I chose an article, and it was after my father died, I know, because it was about health and early diagnosis, basically, how important that was. I got up and gave my talk, and I didn't have to take the final, so my English must have been okay.
And you mentioned too, anti-Semitism was not something you experienced in Holland, or
No, not from the Dutch.
yeah. So tell me about when you did experience that.
Well, I thought it was kind of dicey, you know, when this vice principal said, this is our chapel, and I told her I was Jewish, and she immediately started talking, you know, about the wonderful Jewish family. Like, some of my best friends are Jewish. It was that kind of thing to me. And so, you know, have a very sensitive ear, a very discerning ear. In high school, I belonged to a kind of volunteer group that helped with gym. We wore white skirts and blue sweaters. And there was another group that wore white skirts and red sweaters. But in the gym, it was the helpers. So I was supposed to be up in the gym doing some helping, I guess, but I was playing hooky. I was in the locker room, maybe reading a book, I don't know. I was sitting on the bench in between the lockers. And Mrs. Siegel, a big woman with a big bosom, this was at Jamaica High School, came down to the locker room and found me there, and I wasn't supposed to be there. And I'm sure she said, "What are you doing here?" I don't know what I said, but one thing she said, she ended up saying, you should go back to where you came from, or something. Maybe you should go back to where you came from. Now, Siegel, I thought, was a Jewish name. Maybe it isn't, or maybe it's both. But I knew extremely well that this was way beyond the bounds of what she should be saying. And I didn't react. I mean, I knew. So I was maybe 14. Go back where you came from. Yeah. It didn't even bother me. I thought she was a big, stupid woman. I mean, it did bother me, but I also thought she was a big, stupid woman. So I don't know if that's anti-Semitism. I don't know if she knew I was Jewish, for that matter, but it was certainly anti-something. I can't remember too many other instances, really. I mean, they were probably there, but yeah.
And I know you mentioned that living with your aunt and uncle as legal guardians was not pleasant.
You know, the mic just went out. But no, because it's not charged anymore. Okay, let's see if this works better. Go ahead.
You had mentioned that living with your legal guardians was a difficult experience for you. How about just life in general growing up? Were you able to have other family members that you were able to have contact with? Or traveled back to Holland?
Yeah, we went back to Holland quite a bit because my mother's parents had survived Theresienstadt. They were living in Amsterdam. They had lost 2 of their children. It's really sad, ironic, tragic. I mean, you know, this is the man who came from this very poor household and had just kind of risen to the top, and then, okay. So I remember I loved being back there. I remember when I was about 18 or 20, and I was with a friend, and somehow we were in a bar in Amsterdam. Not that I was a person who was in bars. I don't know why we were there. And some Dutch student said to me, "You live in America? They have to import girls like you there." And I thought, oh, if only I was here.
How about having contact with the families that you stayed with during hiding?
I always had contact with them. And my aunt, who lost her sight at one point, kind of, even when it was half sight, would write letters, would nevertheless write me letters. They went on a holiday to Switzerland, and I went with them. My uncle, who was this formal mayor, he was wearing shorts when he met us at the station. And I remember just laughing. And, I had a good time with them. Yeah.
And you have relationships with them still today?
Yes, I have relationships with them still today. It's now 2024, but I'm going back to Holland in September. And we're all meeting at Bernard's home. That's my youngest foster brother. He was born after the war, but I remember him of course, whenever I went to stay with them on holidays. And I once went back to Holland for 3 years and taught English there at the university, first at a Christian secondary school, and then for 6 weeks. And then I saw an ad for the University of Utrecht. They were looking for an English instructor, and I applied and was hired. So I taught at the University of Utrecht. And in Israel, I also taught first in high schools and then at the Hebrew University. I taught English as a second language there. And at the University of Tel Aviv, where I think I taught poetry or something.
And are you able to speak Hebrew?
I taught in English.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, I speak Hebrew, but, I speak better Dutch and English and French. My Hebrew, it's very serviceable Hebrew, but it's not intellectual Hebrew.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want to share about your life after the war?
I think I always had foreign friends. When I went to graduate school, well, I had American friends, but I was very close to a lot of the foreign students there. They're from India and so on. So I was part of the Foreign Students Association, even though by then I was an American citizen and all that, and I'd had to choose. So I lost my Dutch citizenship, yeah. But I had good American friends there, definitely, and some were lifetime friends. And in Israel particularly, I made very good friends, some of whom are still friends now. I left Israel because I thought I needed psychotherapy. I'd had some in New York. I thought I needed psychotherapy, and by Israeli standards, I don't think I really needed I was functioning just fine. Anyhow, I went to Holland for that reason, and then one of the cousins from my wartime family was an English teacher. I knew him. I'd known him he was younger than I. I knew him as a little boy. He taught Dutch, actually. And so he and I looked at the ads, and that's how I found that job in the Christian middle school. I lost the question. Where was I what were we talking about?
I had asked you what else you wanted to share with us about your life after the war.
After the war. Right, so I liked it in Israel, but I also thought I needed psychotherapy. But I didn't have relatives in Holland anymore. But really, what happened was I decided I wanted to change professions. And I was in a therapy group, and I thought it was very interesting, and I liked it, and I thought I would like to do that, and that I might be good at it. So it was easier for me to go back to the States to get that degree in counseling psychology. And then the group I was in, I didn't really want to go back to the East Coast, because I'd never felt that much at home, and I hated the climate. So I thought to do this course, I would go to California. I was encouraged in that by the group members. And the group leader was a disciple of Fritz Perls, the Gestalt movement at the time. Anyhow, so I applied to schools in the Bay Area in California, and I was accepted at a school where I did a 2-year, or maybe it was only a 1-year program in counseling, even though my undergraduate and graduate degrees were in English literature. So I knew that I had a degree, but that I didn't know a thing. In order to become licensed, you had to have 3,000 hours of supervised experience. But while I was still in school, in order to complete the degree, I needed an internship. And no one would take me without experience, never mind that it was unpaid. But finally, a program at San Quentin Prison was willing to take me. So I said, fine, and I was supposed to start the following Monday. When I was home, I thought, well, maybe this is a little crazy. Do I really think I should be going to San Quentin? So I called them and I told them, I really don't think I should be doing this. They said, oh no, we're expecting you on Monday. So, okay, I went. And to tell you the truth, it was a fascinating experience. It was group counseling, but because of the requirements of my school, I also had to see individual inmates or individual clients. Anyhow, I realized that this profession was a perfect match for me. That it was really, I loved teaching, but I really thought this was good. And I had a fascinating time. I got some nice thank yous and thank you cards from inmates when they left. So that was San Quentin, and after that I got a job as an intern, unpaid intern at Berkeley Mental Health. And after that, my first paid job was in an alcohol recovery program, an outpatient substance abuse recovery program, where I was the only person on the staff who was not a recovering addict. And one of my colleagues, or his wife, asked me once, how come you're here? You're not. What are you recovering from? I thought this was a really good question, and I thought about it, and I said, I think the Holocaust. And she really was taken aback. So I've really liked my work. I've liked teaching very much, and I have liked being a therapist. I found it fascinating and wonderful, and always interesting, challenging, never boring.
When you say you think it was the Holocaust that got you there or choosing to do this work, say more about that.
I don't know. Well, they're alcohol dependent or substance abuse dependent. And I also felt I was dependent in a way that I wasn't, that there was something missing because of my life experiences as a child. I could really relate to their program, and I don't know, you can't say about yourself that you think you were a good therapist, so I won't say that, but I think I was quite successful in being able to connect to people and so on.
Yeah.
I didn't actually like retiring, but I thought it was time. I couldn't take on long-term clients anymore because I was almost 80, and I really liked it when it was difficult. And once you've had clients for a while, it's not a crisis anymore. I thought it was time to retire, but I found it very difficult for quite a long time to be retired. I'm very happy I'm working on this project again of publishing this book of my parents' letters. I'm also in a kind of program for older people called Ashby Village. It's part of the Village movement. And because I'm now very hard of hearing, I facilitate a peer group of hearing loss people, hearing loss support group. So, yeah. And I still travel. I seem to have, aside from my serious hearing loss, I seem to have good health.
And how about your siblings?
Well, they're still alive too, and my sister seems to be in excellent health. She married, and she married very happily, and had 3 daughters. I would say that she was definitely impacted by her wartime experience, a lot of which I never knew about because she didn't talk about it. She had a very supportive husband who was a child of people, who also came from Amsterdam. I mean, his background is Dutch. And my brother married the daughter of Greek survivors. Her father was also in camps. She came from a town near Salonika, but it isn't Salonika. But I don't remember the exact name of her town. And they had 2 sons, one of whom had a daughter 3 years ago. They also married late. My father married at 34. That was considered somewhat late, I think. My brother married at 40. My nephews also late 30s or even. And my older nephew has an adorable 3-year-old daughter and just had a baby son. And my younger nephew, who actually married first, just had a baby son as well. Just this one in May and one in June.
And do you talk about your experiences together, the 3 of you, ever?
Okay, since that multidirectional mic went out, could you speak a little louder?
Yes. Is that better?
Yes.
Do you and your siblings talk about your wartime experiences now?
Now, yeah, to some extent, yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I have friends who were in hiding too. Not all of whom are alive anymore. Yeah.
So what do you think helped you get through not so much even during the war, but I think what you've talked about as after the war has been the harder part.
Right. During the war, I was very protected, you know, and very well treated. And I kind of understood the situation. I didn't feel my parents were rejecting me or sending me away. What got me through, I think that, like my mother, I am resilient and I don't know, persistent. And I have a lot of interests. But I've had quite a lot of hard times too.
And has it been that persistence that has gotten through those hard times for you?
Yes, I would say so.
And what effect do you think your experience in hiding has had on your religious identity or your cultural identity?
None. I mean, I feel it was very enriching, you know. I mean, I made some new friends recently in Ashby Village. I had to explain, not Jewish, by the way. Well, one is Dutch. Not both of them, you know, both of them are somewhat religious. One is, I think, fairly religious. But I mean, like, I had to explain to one of them, she had never heard the word Shoah. This is maybe not an answer to your question, actually. You know, or I told a friend of mine, I met this, you know, I told her I made a new friend. She's a lovely woman, very smart, very nice. She's much nicer than I am. I said, but she's not Jewish. Oh, my friend said, you can't tell her a Jewish joke. I mean, that's it exactly. You see, so that's my identification, really.
And do you talk about being a Holocaust survivor to others often?
Unfortunately, it always comes up, you know, like I'm publishing this book, or, you know, it's inevitable. I was in Holland during the war. It's inevitable. But it's interesting. It's apparently I didn't talk about it in Israel. You know, when I was teaching, very, very busy, I had really good friends. When this book came out, the first one, I sent copies to my friends in Israel. They said, you never told us anything about this. But I wasn't aware that I hadn't told them. It was not that I was hiding anything. In fact, I can't imagine that I didn't tell them.
What is the experience like having your mother's letters now published for people to read?
Well, I'm glad they're published, right? Their history. One of my neighbors here, a lovely woman, you know, they wanted to read them. And then, you know, she was crying. I don't think it's going to change the world in the least. I mean, look what's happening in Israel now. And in Gaza, I mean. I know there are very different opinions about that. I'll tell you my opinion. When I heard how Israel was destroying Gaza and killing thousands, tens of thousands of children, and, you know, in order to get Hamas, which I can understand, I wanted to resign my Israeli citizenship, and I was gonna give it back. Then I went online, and it was going to cost $351 or something like that. And I talked to my best friend, who happens to be Israeli, and Asawa. And she said to me, don't give them any money. Give it to some organization. that promotes understanding between Arabs and Jews. I thought, well, she has a point. So it is very, very bitter to me what is happening in Israel now. It could have been such a wonderful country. I'm afraid that people who see me saying this are going to be very angry at me. But I think terrible things are happening with these religious ideologues taking over. I think it's tragic that what could have been such a wonderful country and with wonderful people is turning into what it is now. What is making what's happening now happen. And Israel is being attacked from all sides now. You know? So whoever is watching this and is angry at me, I want you to know I'm very sad about what is happening.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What has led you to share your story with others?
Like now, you mean, in this interview?
Yes.
Well, I think history is important. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change things. Because of what I just said. I mean, there's war everywhere again. People are cruel all over again. So I think there are good people and bad people. I think I better not get into politics. Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Well, given what you have been through, what is it like seeing that? All this war places happening?
It's horrendous. It's horrendous. What can I say? It's horrendous. It's sad. I mean, what we went through, all these millions of children are going through again now. And their children. Nothing is changing.
If you had the ear of people that could actually make a difference, what would you want to say to them?
What is it again in the Bible? Something about turn your, it's like swords into plowshares, I think. Something like that.
And can you define?
Turn your swords into plowshares. In other words, stop waging war. Go cultivate your garden. That's what I would say. Maybe you could put in, I know this is terrible. I was going to say, maybe you could put anti-testosterone in the water supply. I think we better stop this interview because it's...
Well, as a Holocaust survivor, what would you like future generations to know?
As a survivor,
Yes.
what would I like future generations to know? How evil it was, and how easy it was for people to fall in with this evil. How easy it was for people to see the other as bad, as inferior, as vermin. And the same is happening in the Middle East. My sister and not my sister and I, but I went to Jordan on a trip from Israel with a friend. My sister also went, and not with me. And when she came back, the Israeli soldier, when she went back across the border into Israel, told her something. Well, at least the Israeli taxi drivers won't cheat you. And she said, well, no Arab taxi driver cheated me. So, there's this predisposition to think the other is evil. I've been cheated by Israeli taxi drivers. I was not cheated by Arab taxi drivers. I think there are good and evil people everywhere. So good luck to the human race, is all I can say.
As a psychotherapist, what would your message be to other Holocaust survivors?
I don't have a message to other Holocaust survivors. No.
Any other thoughts that you would like to share about your life today or what's going on today?
I try to just focus on what I'm doing. Like getting this book of my parents' letters together. I don't know how many people will look at it, maybe not very many. I don't care. I just want it printed. I'm not sure whether it will make much of a difference. Probably not, considering what's going on in the world now. But I want to do that. I'm very fortunate. I somehow managed to have enough money and no financial worries through my work. Not through inheritance. And some reparations from the German government, which under the circumstances I feel okay about, because otherwise I might have been kind of, well, not very well off, let's say. So I'm living in a wonderful climate while the rest of the planet seems to be burning up because our politicians are not doing what's necessary. So I'm living in a wonderful climate. I'm not hungry. I have a roof over my head. That's, you know, I like to read. I'm interested in film. I have some friends. I had many very good friends. This was my life. I think this is enough, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your
I
story.
can't hear you, though.
Thank you so much for sharing
You're very welcome.
with us.
It's fine. My pleasure. Well, not pleasure exactly. That phrase is so peculiar, but thank you for what you did. Thank you for your interview.
Thank you.
Now we were going to look at some things. Is the camera stopped?
We are rolling. Go ahead.
I'd like to show you some photos that go with my interview that might give you some idea of what our life was like. Here you see the house that I was born in and that I grew up in Hilversum. So as you see, it's a nice big house and it had a big backyard. My sister and I slept at the rear on the 3rd floor. Okay, now I'm going to show you the next picture.
Okay, and I'll let you know when I got it in focus.
Oh,
And
okay.
I got it in focus. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry. So go ahead.
This is a picture of my parents' wedding, December 12th, 1933. And various cousins of mine were bridesmaids. And here you also see the parents of the bride. And towards the right of the photo, you see my grandfather and grandmother Verdoner. I don't know if this is outside the synagogue or the city hall. I think they may have been married in a synagogue, I'm not sure. But in Holland you also had to marry in a city hall. So I'm not sure which this is. Okay, now we'll go to the next picture.
Okay, go ahead.
This is a photo of my father, Gerrit. I think probably taken on a balcony on the 2nd floor of our home. And it's a nice, relaxed picture of him. This is how I remember him.
Do you know about what year this was taken?
No. Don't know what year it was taken, but before the war. This was before the war, because next I'll show you a picture of him after the war.
Okay. Should we cut? Okay. And great. Go ahead.
Here's a picture of my father after the war, and of course he looks much more stressed and not as jolly as he was in earlier years. That's it. A photo of my mother and myself as a baby. She looks very happy as a young mother. She's 25 there, and I'm just a few months. It's one of my favorite pictures, actually. Cut.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Here's a picture of my family taken in 1939 in our home. My little brother Otto has been born in February, and this photo was taken on my mother's birthday, which was November 27. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a photo taken in 1942, just before we separated and the three children went into hiding. A lot of families took photos like this. As you see, I'm about 7 there, and my little brother is only 3. Cut.
Whenever you're ready.
Yes. This is a photo of my mother. It was probably taken, or it may well have been taken the same day that the photo of my mother and the 3 children was taken. But I don't know, I think maybe I can hold this side.
Yeah, I think that works. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. These are my grandparents, Verdoner, Abraham Verdoner, and her name was Henriette de Jong, but she was called Jet. And this was taken in our front yard in Hilversum. I really loved my grandparents, these grandparents, especially this grandfather. They both died in Auschwitz in their early 70s at the same day my mother was taken there and killed there. Cut. Just a sec, though. Wait for a minute. I want to think for a minute.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, it's fine. These are my wartime foster parents, Dick and Ella Reinders, sitting right in front of their house. They were wonderful people, as you can see here. They were both 34 at the time I moved in with them. I'm done.
Yep.
Ready?
Yes,
Okay, whenever you're ready.
these are my grandparents, Sluizer, Sluizer, David and Bertha, and in the middle is my mother with her parents. This is in front of our home before the war. Done.
Great. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, this is in the home of my wartime foster family, Dick and Ella Reinders. And Roos, their first child, was born November 24th, 1943. Here she is in her baptismal dress. She was baptized, of course, and I'm dressed up very nicely too, and I'm holding her. We were lifelong friends. sisters.
Go ahead.
Here's a photo of a little clandestine second grade class that my father organized for Jewish children. He didn't really like to have me in the Jewish school. I don't know whether he thought it was unsafe or whether the education was inferior. Anyhow, I am sitting the second from the right. First from the right in the front row is my best friend Evelyn Gottlieb, who was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942, 8 years old. And all furthest to the left is Rolien van Gelder, also murdered. I don't know the exact date. I'm not even sure the date is known. Cut. Right. Here is my class in the Jewish school in Amsterdam when we had to leave our home in Hilversum. As you can see, I think this is the second grade, and we are all wearing stars. I am kind of second from right, squeezing my eyes shut against the sun. I have pigtails and ribbons in my pigtails. I don't know how many of these children came back. Cut.
Okay. Whenever you are ready, go ahead.
This is a photo taken at my Uncle Dick's 85th birthday in Holland. So in the middle are Oom Dick, Uncle Dick, and Aunt Ella, and all their by now grown children. I am standing right in between them, and immediately to the left in the photo, holding a baby, is my niece, foster niece, Danielle, with her baby Madelon. All the way, the woman furthest to the left is Roos, my foster sister, my oldest foster sister, and Danielle's mother, and just below her is her husband, Chris. And in the last row, in the highest row, second from right, is Bernard, my foster brother. And sitting in the front row, second from right, is Yes or Agnes, the middle child of the Reinders family. Her name was Yes or Agnes. And, everyone else are their children and some of the children's boyfriends and so on. This was taken in 1994. It's cut.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Here are the three Verdoner children, now grown up, because this is 2008. On the left is Otto, in the middle is Joke, me, and on the right is my sister Francesca. I think this was Passover 2008. We were all on the East Coast. Cut.
Please.